Hello everybody, this is the video for your second lab, which I call descriptives, which are basically the central tendency and the variability measures that you've listened to on lecture 3 and 4. And so I'm going to show you first how to run SPSS to get those various measures of central tendency and variability. They are actually also up in your descriptive statistics. There's actually two ways to do it. I'm going to show you the least desirable way. So this is the one I don't recommend necessarily for this assignment. But if you see Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and Descriptives, I'm going to click over a variable. I'm going to double check options here. So you see you can have some options. I'm going to actually tell it to not give you the minimum and maximum. I don't care about that. I care about the range. And it asks for the mean. So I'm going to just press continue and then OK. And we can look at this and it will give the range, the mean, and the standard deviation. But it is not giving us any way to get the IQR, the interquartile range. It's also not giving us a way to get the median nor the mode. And so for this assignment, we want all of those things. So while this is maybe a nice quick way to get the mean and standard deviation, which might be useful for this assignment and perhaps for your purposes in general, it might be good to do it another way that's more complete. So go under Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and we're going to go back to Frequencies. And so remember with frequencies, if I click this over, it will give me the frequency table. I'm also going to do the histogram here. Why am I doing histogram? Because remember from the lecture on central tendency and variability, the choice of which measure to use depends on the type of distribution you have, whether it's normal or skewed distribution, or whether it's a nominal categorical variable. So I'm going to click that because I want to see the thing. I want to see the distribution. And click on statistics. So I'll redo that. So there's a button here that says statistics. And all you do is click everything that we want. So there's mean, median, mode. So right there in central tendency, right here, are three major measures of central tendency. And then you want to click quartiles. Remember, quartiles are when we're dividing up the data into four separate parts, with each part having 25% of the people in it. So the quartiles, again, are how we get the IQR. The IQR interquartile range is Q3 minus Q1. So you want those quartiles. We also want standard deviation. We don't need to do variance because standard deviation and variance are roughly the same thing. Standard deviation is the thing that we use of those two. And then we want the range. And so now we have the three measures of variability, range, standard deviation, and we're going to have to calculate the IQR, and I'll show you how to do that. So press continue and press OK. And so for this assignment, what I've done is I've given you two things. I've given you one, the distribution. I put that first. So the distribution, this histogram comes last, but it's the first thing that we look at. So I put it first in the assignment. So you have to look at the histogram to see what sort of distribution you have. And so I'm looking at this and knowing that it's a relatively small sample, there's just 40 people here, and there's only a difference of 2 people here. It might look big, but it's not that big. I'm willing to call this relatively normal. So given that it's relatively normal, I'm going to be making a decision that I want the averages. So remember, normal distribution, you want the averages. The averages are the mean for central tendency and standard deviation for variability. Standard deviation is the average distance from the mean of all the scores. If it were skewed, I would want to choose as central tendency the median because the mean is overly influenced by extreme scores. So for skewed distribution, you want the median. For skewed distribution, you probably want to use the IQR as your measure of variability because the standard deviation is an average, and given that the standard deviation is an average, if you have extreme scores, it's going to make the standard deviation look bigger because there's a few people who are far away from the mean. And so given that your standard deviation might get inflated, might become bigger for skewed distributions, the IQR is the best choice. And what's really easy is if you have nominal data, so if you have categorical data, you're going to be choosing mode as the measure of central tendency because you cannot calculate a mean, you can't add, divide, and you cannot calculate the median because for nominal data, you aren't going to have more or less. It's just different categories. There's not higher or lower on your variables. So mode is the only choice for central tendency. And for that nominal data, those nominal data, the only choice for variability is nothing because there is no variability because variability, you need to have more or less, higher, lower on the variable. And with a nominal level measurement, you only have categories. So there's not more or less. So there's no measure of variability. So this is looking normal to me, at least normal enough. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to snip this so we can look at it a little bit better. And so also in your lab, I've put the little box here that has all the statistics. And so all of the stuff that you need is here. So I'm just going to highlight this. So this just tells us our sample size. There's 40 people. 40 people that said something. So valid means 40 people had numbers in the data. Here's our measures of central tendency. And so here we have the mean, median, and mode. So your assignment will ask you for what's the appropriate statistic. The appropriate statistic is the name of this. The statistic is a mean, median, and mode. And ask for the value. The value is the actual number, which is over here. So the mean, which we're going to use in this case because we had a basically normal distribution, is 7.20. So in psychology and social sciences in general, we round to the second decimal place. So 7.20. Go to the second decimal place. The median is 7.00. And the mode, this little thing says there's multiple modes, but the mode is 6. And that's okay for now because we're not using the mode for this because it's a normal distribution, a relatively normal distribution. So that's the central tendency. I'm going to erase this stuff. Then our measures of variability are down here. And so we're not going to talk about variance because the variance is the same thing as standard deviation. So here we have our measures of central tendency. So we have standard deviation and range. So we said it's normal. And so a normal distribution, we want to use the average. The average distance from the mean for all the scores is standard deviation. So the value of the standard deviation is 1.71. 1.71 for this samples data on this variable of sleeping during the first week of the semester. Sleeping during the first week of the semester. The range is 7. So if you take highest to lowest, the range is 7, but just a hint, the range is so broad and not really useful. Probably you're not going to be choosing the range as the best measure of variability in your assignment. And then the IQR, the interquartile range, you're going to have to calculate it. But we have the percentiles here. So this is Q1. This is Q1. So the 25th percentile is Q1. The 75th percentile is Q3. 75th percentile is Q2, which is, by the way, that's the median. So 50th percentile, the median, 7. So remember the interquartile range is Q3 minus Q1. So all you have to do is just take the numbers that are given here and here. So we have 8.75. That's the number at Q3 at the 75th percentile, where 75% of the scores are below this number, minus 6. So it says 6.00. So Q1 is the 25th percentile, so that's the number. 6 is the number where 25% of the scores are below that. So to get the IQR, we just subtract this. So the IQR is 2.75. So that's the IQR. So again, for the assignment, you're going to choose the best statistic for central tendency and the best statistic for variability. And then using the printouts like this, you're going to say what the number is. So what's the number for mean, median, and mode right here? Standard deviations here. And if you say IQR is the best measure, you're going to have to calculate it with Q3 minus Q1, just like that. And that's the number for IQR. That's the value for IQR. So let me go into the lab. So here's the lab. I'm going to post this. The lab, at least for now, as long as we can do it, the lab will have both the questions that you're supposed to answer and also the SPSS output. That's a little bit easier if we can get everything into one document. So here's the lab, and it's just saying what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be choosing the most appropriate descriptive statistics for central tendency and variability based on the distribution of the variable. And here's a very detailed thing about how to do those choices. If it's nominal, we know we want mode, and there's no variability because we don't have more or less of the variable in nominal level measurements. And if it's normal, we go for the averages. The averages are the mean and standard deviation. Standard deviation is the average distance from the mean for all the scores. If you have a skewed distribution, you want to go for median and IQR as your measures, because for both of those things, they're not overly influenced by extreme scores. And so again, the lab, you have to say what the best statistic is based on the distribution and then give the number of that statistic. So I also write up a little bit of things there. For question 1, don't forget that you need to specify the steps to run descriptive statistics. So if you missed that, go back and watch the beginning of this video. And just to show you what I have here, so we have the variables here. And then for each of the variables, I give you the frequency distribution. And based on the frequency distribution, you're going to have to choose what's the best statistic for both central tendency and variability, and what's the actual value of that statistic. Question 2, so here you're given the frequency distribution. You have to make a decision whether this is normal or skewed or other types of distribution. Based on that answer, you're going to look at the output here, and you're going to choose the best statistic. So the best statistic for central tendency, you use the word mean, median, or mode. Value is the actual number. Same thing for variability. So best statistic for variability is going to be either the standard deviation or the IQR. Range is not very useful. Variance is the same thing as standard deviation, but standard deviation is what we tend to use. And then you put the number of whatever you choose here as a value. The value is the number. So there are, I think, 5 questions overall, so make sure that you answer all 5 of those questions. If you have any questions about this lab, you can ask me in one of the live Zoom sessions, or you can email me. So I'll talk